Every fan slash collector has an origin story. What's yours? Mine began in a VCR repair shop. When I was a kid, my grandma, who we called Nanny because she didn't want to sound old, found on a bulletin board or something, I think at a church, I'm not even sure where, but she found a little flyer about someone selling Star Wars toys. Now, this was the early 90s, so there was a phone number on there.
Experienced ComTech. Figures come with chips, readers sold separately.
This is well before the prequels, and even before the mid-90s Power of the Force buffed up rebooted toy line. I called the number, or maybe I had my mom call. Mom, did you call or me? I'm not sure. It turns out that the Star Wars collectibles were being sold at a VCR repair shop in the front room of a place called Sam's Low Cost VCR Repair. Now, I grew up in rural, small town Pennsylvania, and my parents actually knew the guy because they used to cut his hair. Both my parents are hairstylists. Mom and Dad. Finally, I gathered my newspaper money. I was a paperboy, as you can find out in my upcoming novel, The Paperboy. But forgive that plug for something that's not even published yet. But I gathered that money, and my mom drove me down there. She stayed in the car and waited the whole time. And frankly, I have no idea how long it was. It was probably a long time. It felt like just a few minutes to me, but my mom was very patient and remains very patient with me. But it was just so hard to decide what to buy. I was a kid with newspaper money after all. Actually, probably this predated my newspaper money. My newspaper money came at the time of the Power of the Force, where I spent like crazy on some Star Wars toys. So this was where it was Christmas and birthday money only to get my Star Wars collectibles. It was hard to decide what to buy. But what did I buy? Over time, I bought a few figures, a Mad magazine, which I still have, a Beater Y-Wing, which I no longer have, I replaced it with this one, my treasured B-Wing, and this Return of the Jedi Concept Art portfolio. I have no idea how much I paid for it, or any of it frankly, and I'm sure I paid less. I know I paid less than what Sam was asking. Sam told me he didn't care about making that much money or making a lot of money off it because he could see his passion that he had, he could see that in me. And he just was one generation of collector passing it on to the next. And that's what we would do. We would talk about collecting, talk about our love for Star Wars, and he taught me how to be a fan and how to sort of pass it along. I mean, to quote Star Wars. He knew it would go to someone who loved it. It was one generation of collector training the next. Now, aside from my B-Wing, my favorite item is this concept art pack. At the time, it wasn't easy to come across stuff like this. Now, I'd seen plenty of Star Wars documentaries then, read books, magazines, but all that stuff was hard to find. And if you did, it was smaller pictures in a magazine or on a documentary on TVs, looked very different than even the quality I can watch on my phone. It wasn't the same as seeing it in this format. It showed me what it looked like, from conceiving a project to coming up with the ideas to visually doing so, to then translate that to the movie that I'd, at that point, grown up with my entire life. Now it and more are just a Google search away, but these images were mind-blowing. So now let's take a look at what blew my mind when I was about 10 years old. So the first thing you can see, if you can see with my light there, the yellowing inside of that, and this has been sort of packed away for quite a long time. They're numbered in totally in the wrong order at this point. And I had always intended to maybe frame some, but I never have. And now, unfortunately, there's some discoloration to them. They don't look as they did, 30 years ago when I bought them. And I don't know what year these were produced even. Interesting, the cover is printed in the USA. I don't know what year these were produced, so let's take a look. So first we have Luke and the Rancor, and some poor Rancor snack right there. Jabba's palace, this big alien guy. Does anybody know his name? I think he has a name, but he only had like a fan name, like Big Lumpy. That's not it, but. And then you can see, like, I would study these images, like these crazy little nuggets of creatures and aliens that would populate it. Some like Boba Fett here, things that would become very much like the concept, or even Jabba, like what we would get, probably in part based on other designs. Part of the fascinating thing for this at the time was, or certainly now, was comparing it to Ralph McQuarrie. This is all by Ralph McQuarrie, by the way. Comparing it to his early concept art for Star Wars, right? And how he created the visual style for that based on, George Lucas's words and explanations and whatnot, but what was in his head. Whereas this came from, in part, now having seen the previous 2 movies, right? And worked on those films. So it was conceived in a different way. Each, after doing the first one, he knows what Luke Skywalker's face looks like. He knows that these are exactly what the droids look like, those kind of things. Like, was this design done beforehand and then he incorporated into his design? I don't know the process, because if you look at a lot of these, they seem like slightly later designs in the process. I'm just guessing because we'll get to one with the Emperor, and I'll talk about that in a bit. The B-Wing, I love this one. I love the look of this B-Wing. I love the B-Wing. I also got a B-Wing there, so it's a treasured ship. And then just some of the Death Star. And you can see here, the much more completed Death Star, there's like missing panels as opposed to that jagged, spindly, almost spider web look. And that's kind of how it was described in the screenplay more so. And Lucas, they built a full-on model for that of the Death Star as it was. In this version, it's almost like much more complete looking. And then you can see some Ewoks in the Ewok village with Leia in her Ewok custom-made dress, I suppose. That's very, like, fantasy princess. Like, wait a minute, how did she get that dress? They don't have outfits like that. Anyway, here you can see some Ewoks. And you can see they're much more like chipmunk meets monkey meets bear, and some of them don't have hoods, which I found interesting there. Some of them don't have hoods. They're walking C-3PO up his log throne pathway. And then one of my favorite ships, the A-Wing. I had this one for the Power of the Force line. I just love the blue stripe as opposed to the red. I would have preferred a blue stripe as a kid. Blue's more my color than red, although it's still an awesome ship with a red stripe. That's like an argument I have having a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. What color is best? Green stripe, by the way, would be my choice. So here you see the sail barge explosion, and if you watch my previous video on the Return of the Jedi rough draft version, this was done by R2-D2 overloading it rather than the gun, at least maybe at this point, depending on when this concept came about. Here is one of my favorite ones in the packet, one I would examine like crazy as a kid. So you can see all the guards here. You can see these pilots, and more guards over here. Wow, I didn't even know. And the stormtroopers in the back. Of course, one of the best. The ship I sort of covet the most in my collection, would love to have, is the Imperial shuttle here. And then you see the weird, senator, regent, monk, cardinal looking dudes. And here they have kind of more distinct character than they seem to have to me in the final film. I've always been fascinated by them. And reading the novelization for an upcoming video, there's insight into sort of like their schemes and things, just a little bit, but it's just amazing that like just these little like things in the background of all these films, and you can see it here. And it was in the like I said, in the novelization, where you get a little bit more insight into what they might be after. You see Cy Snoodles and the Max Rebo Band. By the way, my name, Josiah, but you can call me Cy. That's what Judy calls me, that's what my friends call me, that's what my family calls me. So please, call me Cy. I spell it C-Y, even though it's not spelled that way in my name. You can see Lando in disguise and my buddy Space Lumpy here. Again, let me know his name if you know it. And here we have entering Jabba's palace. There's a lot of Jabba's palace in this. I wonder what the distribution for art for each of the segments of the movie. You see blowing up the core of the Death Star there. And then once again, Ewok battle, AT-ST, you see the Ewoks. These, again, slightly more like the ears look just a little bit more pointy, almost more maybe like mouse-like rather than the bear-like fuzzy ears, and kind of gives them maybe a less marketable look for George Lucas. Here is the battle in the throne room, another really cool one, just that sinisterness to Vader that in McQuarrie's concept art, which just really is part of what defined the character quite famously. He wasn't necessarily supposed to have that mask. It was just something that Ralph McQuarrie conceptualized from like him traveling ship to ship, and it defined him visually. And here we have Jabba's palace, which almost looks like it could be a photograph of like the model that they used for that piece in the film. If that was a set, that'd be pretty cool. And then one of my favorites here is Luke getting zapped by the Emperor. The Emperor looks very like ethereal and otherworldly here, like an apparition almost, very ghostly, in a way that, you know, he couldn't necessarily in the film, being a real actor. That just, it gives it another creepy eeriness to this. But one thing that I sort of lament with this packet now, knowing what I know, is I wish that it had the concept art for the throne room with the lava. That would be amazing. I've seen it online. As I said, with Google, you can find all these things much more easily now than you could then. And then here is another one of the sail barge and the skiff, and more just seeing the idea that all these guys are watching. You know, I don't know that that was necessarily is fully well conveyed in the final film, that it's like a big show that Jabba's putting on. And finally, another one, again, the concept for the speeder bike sequence. And I love about this one is that if you look in the back, how different the scout troopers look. Because this looks like, you know, this would be a painting from the film or used to market the film. But these guys back here, they look different. Like, there's something different about that design. It wasn't like nailed in yet, and that's what I love to see. What might have been, what could have been, those kind of things. And then finally, I purposely put this one at the back because it is my favorite. It is Endor, and I have my own little Ewok village there. All the building materials from that came from my parents' house in Pennsylvania, the woods. My dad helped me cut those pieces down for my Ewok village. That I love Ewoks. And so you can see the AT-AT here, and then Vader walking through. And then, you know, these guys coming in. I just love this concept. There's like stories and stories and stories to be told in each of these paintings. And then finally, the last piece with that red marker, I believe that was me as a kid that did that. This is just information about each of these things, a little bit about Ralph McQuarrie. I read this over and over and over and over and over and over as a kid, and just looked at these pictures, read this. It was just such an amazing process. So that's my origin as a collector. It began in a VCR repair shop. So tell me, what's yours and where did it begin? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you for watching.